The young lady and her husband shared a profound affection for one another. Upon discovering her pregnancy, she felt a deep sense of compassion for her spouse. Consequently, she entrusted me to him as a warming maid. Several months later, the young lady gave birth to a pair of twins, a boy and a girl. In a bid to honor the young lady's sincere devotion, her husband resolutely decided to end my life as a form of retribution. Nevertheless, their love continued to flourish, becoming a celebrated tale within the capital. Yet at the moment of my demise, I was already 2 months pregnant. When I opened my eyes again, I found myself returned to the moment before the young lady sent me to her husband. In this life, I boldly ascended to the bed of his father, transforming myself into a mother-in-law. 01. Just as in the previous life, the young lady was diagnosed with pregnancy by the physician as the year drew to a close. The young master hurried back. Yet his gaze lingered on me for a moment as he passed by. That look was unsettlingly sticky. Soon after, the sounds of the young lady's playful complaints and the young master's gentle coaxing echoed from within the room. From afar, it sounded like a display of affection. After the young master departed, the young lady as personal maid, Hongya, began to scold me. Pa, which respectable young lady has a bosom so ample that it nearly bursts from her attire? And that figure, no courtesan in a brothel could rival her allure. What good is it for the young lady to keep such a vixen like Chantao around? Inside the room, the young lady sighed. Do not speak so recklessly. Before long, she summoned me into the room. I knelt with my head bowed. The young lady scrutinized me for a while before breaking into a radiant smile. Chantao, you are indeed fortunate. This fortune I dared not desire any longer. In my previous life, mere days after the young lady uttered those words, the young master dragged me into the room and forcibly took my virtue. From that moment on, whenever the young master visited the young lady as quarters, he would summon me to warm his bed. I could not articulate my feelings of consent or reluctance. The lady had raised me beside the young lady since childhood and had even brought me as part of her dowry, intending that I serve the young master once the young lady bore a child. As a maid, I possessed no power of choice. Yet, on the eve of the young lady's delivery, the doctor revealed that I was 2 months pregnant. Suddenly, my life held a glimmer of hope. I thought to myself that I would devote the latter part of my life to serving the young master and the young lady, raising this child to adulthood, thus ensuring my existence had not been in vain. When the young master sought me out, I was filled with excitement, eager to share this joyous news. However, before I could utter a word, I was pushed into the water by a servant at the young master's side. In my struggle, I glimpsed the murderous intent and cold demeanor in the young master's eyes. He sighed and said, "My lady has shown me unwavering sincerity. I cannot keep you here and cause her heartache." The sensation of drowning was unbearable. In this life, I truly wished to avoid experiencing it a second time. 02. After the young lady became pregnant, the young master visited her daily. Yet, each time he came, his gaze would linger on me. Sometimes it would rest upon my face, other times my bosom, and, at times, my waist. Such scrutiny sent shivers through my heart. It was evident he was quite pleased with my appearance and figure. In these moments, the young lady's maid, Hongya, would glare at me with malice. Once the young master departed, she would spit derisively, calling me a vixen. Although the young lady smiled sweetly, there was a chill in her eyes. How foolish I had been in my previous life to believe that the young lady was genuinely virtuous and would not care for my presence. Hidden behind her smile was an unmistakable glimmer of murderous intent. This could not continue. In 2 days, the young master would drag me into his chamber. Yet, as a maid, my contract of servitude remained bound to the young lady. It was indeed arduous to escape this fated subjugation. Coincidentally, a commotion arose outside, with a servant exclaiming excitedly, "Young madam, the Duke of the State has won a great victory and will return to court tomorrow." The young lady's face brightened instantly. "Call for rewards." I clenched my fingers, suddenly struck with an idea. The Duke of the State was the young master's father. Merely 32 years of age, and had never taken a wife, his inner chambers lacked even a concubine. To become his woman would ensure that no one would torment me further. Not even the young lady or the young master could defy the Duke. Moreover, the young master was not his biological son. His father had been a subordinate of the Duke, accompanying him in military campaigns for many years before perishing. When his wife learned of this tragedy, she too succumbed. At that time, the young master had been but a child, left without care. The Duke then took him into his household, adopting him as a son. For many years, the Duke's estate had known only this one young master. 03. The young lady was overjoyed to hear of the Duke's impending return. She held him in high esteem. Early the next morning, she instructed Hongye to prepare her attire. Hongye remarked cheerfully, "Mistress, now that you are with child, the Duke will surely be delighted to hear it. Once you give him a healthy grandson, he might even petition the court to bestow the title of heir upon the young master. In the future, you shall be the esteemed wife of the heir." The young lady smiled even brighter, gently stroking her belly with anticipation. I stood silently beside her, my head bowed. Alas, she would soon be disheartened. In my previous life, upon the Duke's return, he attended a banquet at the palace. The young lady waited until dusk but never saw the Duke return. However, this suited me well. The young lady was not fond of my face, and soon dismissed me. I returned to my quarters, gathering the silver I had saved over the years, and quietly went about making arrangements. Finally, I discovered the route the Duke would take upon his return. 04. As night fell, I stood at the path the Duke would traverse, holding a lantern. My clothing was thin, and the wind sent shivers coursing through my body. My heart began to race. The Duke held a high position, and I had heard that many noble women sought to marry him, with countless attempting to seduce him. However, this particular gentleman shunned the company of women. Those who dared to pursue him were swiftly dealt with, often punished, and sold from the estate. As such incidents accumulated, the maids within the estate ceased to entertain such thoughts. The more I pondered, the more fear enveloped me. My limbs began to weaken, and finally, steeling my resolve, I thought to myself, if I did not succeed today, tomorrow the young master would claim my virtue, and I would ultimately meet a tragic end. It would be better to take a chance. Perhaps if I were sold outside the estate, I might find a way to survive. After waiting for about half an hour, a figure gradually approached. By the moonlight, I beheld a man of roughly 30 years. Unlike the young master's refined elegance, this man appeared robust, with broad shoulders and a powerful physique. A long scar adorned his forehead, and his deep-set eyes exuded an aura of authority. He advanced toward me with a commanding presence. My legs felt weak. He seemed capable of crushing me with a single blow. This must be the Duke. He was unaccompanied. I took a deep breath, biting my lip, and walked toward him, lantern in hand. As I passed by, I feigned a misstep, exclaiming as I collided with his chest. 05. Engaging in seduction was a novel experience for me, and I found myself somewhat clumsy. Yet, the maids within the estate often secretly called me a vixen, lacking decorum. The young servants gazed at me with unabashed desire, frequently approaching me, hoping to take liberties. It seemed that most men favored my type. Recalling my previous life, I remembered how the young master had particularly adored this aspect of me. As I fell, I deliberately positioned myself to crash against the Duke's chest. The Duke, inebriated, did not flinch when I collided with him. Instead, he frowned and embraced my waist. My front pressed against his solid chest, causing me discomfort from the impact. His arms were powerful and firm, gripping my waist tightly enough to cause pain. I could not help but let out a soft cry, tears welling in my eyes from the ache. The Duke lowered his gaze, regarding me with a deep voice. "Who are you?" An aura of coldness surrounded him, and his piercing gaze made the scar on his forehead appear even more menacing. At a glance, he resembled a fearsome deity of death. My legs felt even weaker. Regret washed over me, yet recalling the sensation of drowning in my previous life, I forced myself to remain composed. Drawing upon the seductive techniques I had read about, I steeled my resolve. Raising her head with reddened eyes, she bit her lip and playfully chided. "Who are you? Release me at once." Then, summoning her courage, she feigned a struggle, her thin garment inadvertently revealing more of her bosom with each movement. The Duke's gaze fixed upon her, growing ever more profound, as his grip around her waist tightened. After a moment of silence, the Duke smirked slightly, scoffing, "Little girl, you possess quite the audacity to entice me." Red Leaf's words rang true. I was indeed born to be an enchantress. In my previous life, I had spent several months with my master, well aware of what pleases men most. Despite the Duke's formidable demeanor, he was still a man. Prior to this encounter, I had indulged in several cups of peach blossom wine, emboldening my spirit. Now, nestled in the Duke's embrace, the intoxicating scent of alcohol enveloping me, I found myself succumbing to a deeper inebriation, gazing up at him with flushed cheeks and hazy eyes, my fear dissipating slightly. Feigning ignorance, I exuded allure, transforming 3 parts of drunkenness into 7. The Duke was finally intrigued by my demeanor. However, instead of returning me to my quarters, he led me to his private retreat. That night, I exerted every ounce of my charm, scarcely sleeping, yearning for his satisfaction, hoping he would find delight in me and thus grant me refuge, preserving my life. The Duke, possessing a physique even more robust than my masteress, proved difficult to withstand. Before dawn, I endured discomfort as I limped back to my mistress. Just as the sun began to rise, Red Leaf summoned me to attend to my mistress as she awoke. Upon entering the room, I discovered that my master had also spent the night with my mistress. She was blushing, while he wore a smile, their closeness radiating affection. Since my mistress's pregnancy, my master had not stayed here for quite some time. I discerned that his gaze upon me was now more fervent than before, as if some unspoken agreement had been reached the previous night. While assisting him with his morning routine, he casually squeezed my hand, his smile laden with significance. Startled, I withdrew my hand and turned my head, only to find my mistress glaring at me, holding her handkerchief with a cold demeanor. This scene was eerily reminiscent of my past life, causing a slight heaviness in my heart. My mistress did not admonish me, maintaining her amiable appearance. After my master departed, she readied herself to pay her respects to the Duke, cheerfully instructing me to carry a steaming bowl of chicken soup alongside her. All the while, the heat radiating from the bowl tormented me, and despite my hand swelling and blistering from the heat, I held it tightly. The bowl was a royal gift, the soup of the finest quality. Should I drop it, my life as a servant would be forfeit. Noticing my pale countenance and silence, my mistress's smile deepened. She praised, "Spring Peach, you are truly fortunate." Red Leaf shot a disdainful glare at me, venomously retorting, "Carrying a bowl of soup seems like it's cost you your life. One might think you were the mistress, while you're merely a lowly servant. If it weren't for our mistress's kindness, your seductive demeanor would have long since led to your demise." I bowed my head in silence. Yet Red Leaf, still unsatisfied, delivered a stinging slap across my face. The impact turned my head, and as my grip faltered, some soup spilled, instantly scorching the back of my hand. Tears brimmed in my eyes from the pain, but I clenched my teeth, refusing to release the bowl. At that moment, my mistress calmly reprimanded, "Red Leaf, do not be unruly." She then turned to me with a smile. "Red Leaf has been spoiled by me. Do not let her anger unsettle you." I lowered my gaze and meekly replied, "It is a blessing that Sister Red Leaf is willing to discipline me." My mistress's satisfaction seemed to grow. "You are quite understanding." Red Leaf muttered under her breath, "Indeed. A wretched creature." Upon reaching the Duke's courtyard, I noticed numerous guards within. As we stepped inside, I overheard Steward Sue questioning the Duke. "Has there been any news of the person the Duke seeks?" My heart leapt, and my grip on the soup nearly faltered. Before the guards could respond, Steward Sue caught sight of us, his gaze lingering on me with an inscrutable expression before he welcomed my mistress inside with a broad smile. "Is the young madam here to pay her respects to the Duke? Please do come in." Puzzled, I recalled that in my previous life, the Duke had left early for his duties, and my mistress had not encountered him. Yet, it seemed he had remained this time. My heart raced as I dutifully followed, lowering my eyes and keeping my demeanor submissive. Upon entering, I felt a commanding gaze upon me, but I dared not look up. Placing the soup down as instructed and retreating with my head bowed, suddenly, a voice laced with cold authority commanded, "Halt." Startled, I lifted my gaze and found the Duke. His eyes narrowed and fixed on me, his expression inscrutable. This morning, he had still been asleep when I had climbed into bed under the influence of alcohol. He had not inquired about my origins, and I feigned ignorance of his true identity. As a servant who had crossed boundaries in drunken folly, my instinct was to flee. Now, it was as if I was formally meeting the Duke for the first time. I stood frozen, feigning the perfect blend of fear and trepidation. Before dropping to my knees with a thud, trembling as I stammered, I humbly greet the Duke. With my head bowed, my face pale and trembling, I presented myself as a picture of panic. The Duke's icy gaze softened slightly. My mistress frowned at me, a hint of displeasure in her eyes, then turned to the Duke, querying, "Father, is there something amiss?" The Duke scrutinized me for what felt like an eternity before finally speaking. "There is nothing wrong. Merely noting that this girl has injured her hand." He glanced at Steward Sue, who promptly nodded, "I shall send someone to attend to this young lady's wounds." I followed the maid summoned by Steward Sue, aware of my mistress's cold gaze upon me. Red Leaf, on the other hand, glared at me with palpable envy. Once my mistress completed her respects, my hand was being bandaged. The Duke said nothing further, and I dared not inquire, fearing exposure. I silently accompanied my mistress back to our quarters, my heart racing. After a brief glance at me, My mistress entered her room. Red Leaf, still seething, struck me sharply across the face and spat on the ground, angrily rebuking, "Do you think the Duke would ever desire someone like you? Had it not been for our mistress's grace, you would have long been expelled from this household. You disgrace our mistress. I ought to tear your face apart." I knelt on the ground, clutching my face and grinding my teeth in silence. Did the Duke plan to dismiss me? Had my attempt to seduce him failed? A wave of despair washed over me. Was I doomed to the same fate of being a mere bedwarmer for my master in this life as well? Red Leaf made me kneel for 2 hours. Ultimately, my mistress intervened, concerned that I might injure my knees, fearing that my master would think her too harsh on her servants, damaging her reputation for kindness. She ordered Red Leaf to apply ointment to my face and hand. By evening, although my hand was still healing, the swelling on my face had subsided. Soon after, my master arrived. I served alongside Red Leaf, as we attended to my mistress and my master during dinner. His gaze frequently fell upon me, the urgency in his eyes making me exceedingly uncomfortable. My mistress smiled, casually glancing at me, while Red Leaf continued to glare at me with animosity. I felt as if a thorn was lodged in my back, my palms slick with cold sweat. At last, the two of them finished their evening meal. The gentleman clasped the lady's hand with a gaze full of affection, tenderly proclaiming, "To have a wife such as you, what more could a husband desire? To marry you is the greatest fortune of my life." The lady, leaning weakly against him, playfully retorted, "Husband, do not jest about me." Witnessing the couple's insincere display of affection left me with an icy heart, stirring within me a sense of discontent that had never before surfaced. The lady regarded me as a thorn in her side, wishing for my swift removal. The gentleman, having long coveted me, sought to fulfill his desires through me, yet felt guilty towards his wife, naively contemplating that my disappearance would somehow restore peace, pretending nothing had transpired. Hongya thought I was reckless to entice the gentleman, believing it had caused the lady heartache, and thus harbored intense disdain towards me, subjecting me to humiliation and random beatings. Yet in all of this, who among them ever asked for my consent? To them, I was naught but an object, to be manipulated and traded at their whim. They had not even deemed it necessary to discuss my fate before unilaterally deciding my life and death. How absurd! The couple indulged in their affectionate exchange for about a quarter of an hour before the gentleman grew impatient, casting frequent, sticky glances in my direction. The urgency in his gaze made my stomach churn. The lady maintained her smile, yet I noticed the handkerchief in her grasp had crumpled under her tension. With a gentle smile towards the gentleman, she softly said, "Husband, I am currently unwell and cannot keep you here to rest. I have arranged for a room next door for you. You must rise early for court tomorrow, so please retire." The gentleman's face brightened as he held her hand and smiled. "You are indeed considerate, my dear." The lady playfully shot him a glare before turning to me, commanding, "Chuntao, take the gentleman to the room next door." The gentleman stood, his gaze aflame with desire as he looked at me. Seeing him mirror his past self, I felt a chill run down my spine. Under the unwavering gaze of the gentleman and the frigid stare of the lady, I froze, leading him out the door towards the side room. Just as we approached the threshold, he suddenly lunged forward, wrapping his arms tightly around me. My face paled in fright as I struggled and cried out, "Gentleman, what are you doing?" He held me firmly, his eyes locked onto mine, saying, "Dear Chuntao, your lady has given you to me. Tonight you belong to me. Let me cherish you well." As he spoke, his lips drew near, his warm breath brushing against my face, plunging my heart into despair. I hastily recoiled, pushing him away with desperation, my voice choking as I protested, "Gentlemen, please release me. I am but the lady's maid." He stifled my struggles, declaring, "In the future, serve your lady and me well, and I shall not mistreat you." With that, he swept me off my feet and carried me into the room. Panic surged within me, and I cried out anxiously, "You, let go of me. I am already the gentleman's property." The side room was not far from the main chamber, both situated within the same courtyard. The clamor outside would undoubtedly reach the lady within. She likely did not anticipate that the gentleman would be so eager, resorting to such actions before even entering the room. Her displeasure was palpable, especially as my voice had risen in pitch, making it impossible for them to ignore. Soon, the lady emerged alongside Hongya. The gentleman halted abruptly, his expression darkening. "What did you say?" As he loosened his grip, I quickly slipped away, adjusting my attire, my eyes reddened and face pale, filled with panic as I gazed at him. The gentleman's demeanor soured, his gaze falling upon the lady with evident displeasure. The lady, too, seemed caught off guard by my outburst, her composed smile faltering. She disapproved of my serving the gentleman, yet was even more dissatisfied with my refusal to comply with her wishes. My outburst undoubtedly tarnished her flawless image in the gentleman's eyes. Regaining her composure, the lady furrowed her brow and directed her gaze at me. "What nonsense are you spouting, maid? My father has always shunned the company of women." Hongya quickly interjected with outrage. "Haven't you learned your lesson today? How dare you harbor thoughts of the Duke?" Noticing the gentleman's puzzled expression, Hongya recounted how I had seduced the Duke and subsequently faced punishment. The gentleman's eyes turned cold as he regarded me. The lady's grip on her handkerchief gradually loosened. With Hongya's words, it became evident to the gentleman that the matter no longer involved the lady. She remained the gentle and virtuous wife, while I was reduced to a base maid, aspiring to reach beyond my station. In his eyes, I was deemed unworthy of his status as the Duke's illegitimate son, seeking to climb the social ladder through him, inciting his wrath. His dissatisfaction with his father, the Duke, had festered for quite some time, exacerbated by the Duke's failure to bestow upon him the title of heir. The gentleman had long harbored resentment, even towards the Duke himself. In my previous life, after my demise, the gentleman had yet to assume the heir's position. He and the lady grew increasingly resentful towards the Duke, often cursing him for not treating the gentleman as his own son. "He has no offspring. When he grows old, he will have to rely on the gentleman," they would remark, pondering how they could secure a favorable outcome for themselves in the future. They even secretly plotted to end the Duke's life. Once he was gone, the Grand Duke's estate would have only the gentleman as its sole heir, and even if he was not the official heir, the estate would inevitably pass to him. Now, upon hearing Hongya's words, the gentleman's pent-up hostility erupted. His countenance darkened as he struck me across the face, bellowing, "Wretch, how dare you slander my father?" I fell to the ground, blood trickling from my mouth. He scoffed, turning away to command, "Someone, bind her, and throw her into my chamber." As the attendants approached to seize me, I caught sight of Hongya's mocking expression and the lady's frigid gaze, intensifying my sense of injustice. This time, even in death, I would not remain a mere pawn at their mercy. I broke free from the attendants, kneeling before the lady, tears streaming down my face as I begged, "Lady, I implore you, plead for me to the gentleman. You love him dearly and would not allow him to seek other women. By bringing me to the Duke, are you not aware that the gentleman has taken a liking to me? I am now the Duke's property and shall no longer be an eyesore to you and the gentleman. Please spare me." Upon hearing my plea, the gentleman's expression darkened further. He cast a disappointed glare towards the lady. I knew that this thorn had successfully embedded itself in his heart. The lady's complexion paled slightly as she shook her head, about to speak, when suddenly, Steward Sue, sent by the Duke, arrived. Steward Sue was tasked with escorting me away. I glanced at the lady's forced smile and the gentleman's sullen gaze towards her, feeling a weight lift from my heart as I sank to the ground. Lowering my head, I concealed my triumphant smile. How wonderful! I had won my gamble. My efforts last night were not in vain. The maid who treated my wounds was the daughter of Steward Sue. I had inadvertently revealed to her that the lady intended to give me to the gentleman as a concubine. Now, the gentleman's prize had slipped through his fingers, all thanks to his own wife. This thorn in his heart would likely remain embedded for a lifetime. Before departing, the lady cast a deep glance in my direction, her smile devoid of warmth. "Chuntao, you truly are fortunate." I curtsied, bowing my head submissively. "May you be blessed, my lady." Hongya spat on the ground in anger, her jealousy palpable. I followed Steward Sue to the Duke's residence. The task of bandaging me was once again entrusted to the maid named Su Xiong, the biological daughter of Steward Sue. The Duke had matters to attend to and would be away for several days. By the time I arrived, he had already departed, granting me a few tranquil days. It is said that after my departure that day, the gentleman did not leave but rather forcibly drew Hongyi into the room, claiming her for himself. Unlike in my previous life, Hongyi was not merely a bedwarmer. She was elevated to the status of a concubine and moved to another courtyard. Henceforth, the gentleman would spend every night in the company of concubine Hong. When the Duke returned, it was 5 days later. On the second day of his return, he finally laid eyes on me. His gaze was heavy, scrutinizing me with a penetrating intensity that was accentuated by the long scar across his face, instilling a sense of dread. I knelt before him, obediently lowering my head. "I, a mere servant, have sullied the Duke in my drunken state. I beseech you to punish me." After appraising me for a moment, the Duke commanded, "Lift your head." I bit my lip, tears brimming in my eyes as I gazed up at him. Perhaps recalling my fervor from that night, his eyes darkened slightly. He spoke in a deep voice. "Very well, you shall remain in my courtyard from now on." Thus, I became the sole woman within the Duke's estate. While he might have been intrigued by my fervor and physical form, in his eyes, I was of little consequence, relegated to the status of a mere bed warmer. Attending to me was Su Xiang. The Duke's presence in the estate was fleeting. He would return for 5 days out of 10. Each time he returned, I would prepare nourishing soups and snacks to present to him. With little to occupy my time within the estate, I endeavored to please the Duke. And my culinary skills flourished. One day, when the Duke returned, I brought him a bowl of turtle soup to the study. He regarded the soup in my hands with a knowing look, and after a brief glance at me, he drank it down in one gulp. He then inquired, "Are you not bored in the estate?" I shook my head, feigning an eagerness that revolved solely around him, my eyes sparkling as I replied, "Each day. Besides learning to cook, I count the days until your return. It is hardly boring." Of course, aside from these activities, I had perused numerous texts filled with methods to win a man's favor. The Duke raised an eyebrow, taking hold of my hand in his large, calloused grip, causing a slight pain to tingle through me. I lowered my gaze, feigning shyness. "Oh, your culinary skills have indeed improved." I looked up with delight, exclaiming, "I have long heard that you are a decisive hero, whom I have admired for years. To personally serve you and prepare soup for you is a blessing I have earned across many lifetimes." He narrowed his eyes, remaining silent, before lifting me into his arms and carrying me into the inner chambers. Listening to the powerful rhythm of his heartbeat, resting against his broad, sturdy shoulder, I gently closed my eyes. That night, the Duke was particularly rough, leaving me to rest upon the bed the entire following day. The Duke was wholly dedicated to military affairs and serving the nation, showing little interest in romantic pursuits or offspring. Otherwise, he would not have gone so many years without a wife or concubines. Though he had tasted the pleasures of intimacy and would seek me for amusement upon his return, he was not truly enamored. There were some who, seeing my successful seduction of him, wished to imitate my actions, but all were swiftly dismissed. 2 months flew by, and still, I remained the only warm bed in the Duke's courtyard. I led a rather mundane existence, while the lady and the gentleman's affairs grew increasingly tumultuous. The facade of their affection was shattered. The virtuous image the gentleman held of the lady had long since faded, and he no longer felt remorse towards her. He gradually ceased visiting her quarters, preferring to frequent concubine Hong's instead. Concubine Hong discovered she was with child much earlier than in my previous life and, upon learning the news, eagerly relayed it to the lady. Loyal to a fault, even as she followed the gentleman, she continued to regard the lady as her mistress. However, the lady's malicious actions, driven by jealousy, resulted in concubine Hong nearly losing her life. That very day, the lady sold her off. Even as a concubine, she was but a servant, subject to the whims of the mistress. It was said that on that day, Hong Yi pleaded and struggled for a long time, and when taken away, she was still stained with blood. Upon his return, the gentleman was furious, engaging in a fierce argument with the lady, which caused her to suffer a miscarriage. In the days that followed, the gentleman took one concubine after another, rarely visiting the lady's quarters. The once deeply affectionate couple now seemed to harbor the intent to elevate the concubines above the wife. 2 months later, I was diagnosed with pregnancy. Although the Duke was indifferent to offspring, upon hearing this news, he elevated me to the status of a concubine and rewarded me generously. The news spread quickly, causing the lady and the gentleman to become agitated. With my pregnancy, the gentleman would no longer be the sole child in the Duke's household. It was clear that should I bear a daughter, it would be less concerning, but if a son were born, even as a bastard, he would be the Duke's biological child, while the gentleman's illegitimate son would face a precarious future. That very night, the gentleman visited the lady's chamber. Their argument escalated, and he struck her twice. The lady, experiencing distress, needed several days of herbal remedies to recover her health. Once she regained her strength, she sought an audience with me. I instructed Su Xiang to invite her in. After months apart, the lady appeared significantly thinner, her belly noticeably large. She wore a facade of smiles, yet her pale complexion, despite layers of powder, could not be concealed. "Madam Chen, I knew from the start that you were fortunate," she greeted me with a beaming smile. I returned her smile, replying, "Thanks to the young lady's guidance in introducing me to the Duke, I would not be where I am today." For a fleeting moment, the lady's expression stiffened, as if she regretted nearly biting through her silver teeth. She exchanged polite pleasantries before directing a maid to present me with nourishing medicine and jewelry. Throughout our conversation, her gaze lingered on my belly, a mixture of suspicion and malice in her eyes. After her departure, I instructed Su Xiang to dispose of everything she had given me. Upon entering the Duke's courtyard, she had gifted me an exquisite bracelet. This jade bracelet had been steeped in musk and saffron for 2 months, purportedly preventing pregnancy and causing miscarriages. It was intended as a reward for my service to the gentleman. In my previous life, I wore it until it accidentally broke, allowing me to conceive. In this life, however, it served its purpose. The first thing I did upon entering the Duke's courtyard was to discard it. I suspected the other jewelry had undergone similar treatments. As my belly grew, at 5 months, the lady was nearing her delivery, while the gentleman took yet another favored concubine. This new concubine, brought from a brothel and unfamiliar with etiquette, deliberately provoked the lady. This confrontation led to the lady's premature labor, resulting in a daughter and a deceased son. Overwhelmed by the trauma, the lady fainted. She suffered injuries and spent most of her time bedridden. The gentleman's affection for her waned further, and he seldom visited her chambers. When I reached 6 months, the physician informed the Duke that I was likely carrying a son. The Duke was elated. Though he claimed not to care for progeny, he desired to nurture a son capable of military prowess. Regrettably, the gentleman, traumatized by his father's death, refused to train in martial arts, and the Duke was reluctant to force the issue. In his moments of leisure, the Duke would take my hand, smiling as he said, "If it is a boy, do not spoil him excessively. I intend to lead him into battle." I leaned against him, nodding slightly, gazing at him with admiration. "If he can one day become a great hero like you, then my existence in this world will not have been in vain." He embraced me, his laughter resonating with exuberance. Gradually, his laughter subsided, and with a sigh, he said to me, "Regardless of whether you bear a son or a daughter, I shall not seek the Emperor's decree for the title of heir to the Duke. Such a position is too lofty. Let it end with me. Should another take the seat, it may not be certain that they would live to enjoy such fortune." I was momentarily taken aback. No wonder in my past life he had been so reluctant to seek the Emperor's decree for the son-in-law. I obediently nodded. "I will heed your wishes." He glanced at my belly and spoke gently. "I shall do my utmost to educate him. His future path will depend on his own fortune. As for the rest, do not expect to bask in the light of my role as a father." I nodded, caressing my belly, whispering, "To be your child is already a blessing for him." I accepted the reality that the child could not become the heir. Yet, not everyone could reconcile with this fact. Upon hearing that I was carrying a male child, the son-in-law sought out the Duke the very next day. At that moment, I was preparing a restorative soup for the Duke and had just reached the door of his study when I overheard a quarrel from within. The Duke had refused the son-in-law's request to seek an imperial decree for himself. The son-in-law had long harbored resentment towards him. Learning that he was soon to have a son and still being denied, the hatred within him surged uncontrollably. He sneered, "You refuse to let me become the heir merely to preserve it for your own flesh and blood? If it weren't for my father, you would have perished long ago. Not only are you ungrateful, but now you treat me in this manner, revealing your true selfish nature." A resounding slap echoed through the room. The son-in-law stormed out, fury etched across his reddened face, while behind him stood the Duke, his expression grave and filled with disappointment. Upon exiting, he encountered me standing in the courtyard, and his eyes blazed with hatred. "Chun Tao, you treacherous harlot. If you had followed me back then, we wouldn't be in this predicament. You wish for your son to become the heir? Dream on." As he spoke, his demeanor became almost maniacal. He charged at me, intent on knocking me down. I instinctively stepped back, casting a pleading glance towards the Duke. The son-in-law did not succeed. Being a martial artist, the Duke swiftly shielded me in his embrace and kicked the son-in-law away. He fell to the ground, struggling against the guards who restrained him, his eyes burning with resentment as he glared at me and the Duke. The Duke's face turned ashen, disappointment deepening in his gaze as he shook his head and ordered, "Take the eldest son away, keep him under strict surveillance. He is not to be released without my permission." Despite his desperate struggles, the guards led him away. I gazed at his current state, reminiscent of my past self, who had once looked at me with such calmness, observing as I floundered in the water. Now, however, our fates had diverged sharply. Months later, I gave birth to a boy. The Duke named him Rongzian. I thought he did not seem to embody the legend of one who did not desire offspring. He appeared to hold affection for this child. Rong Xian did not inherit the Duke's robust physique. His features bore no resemblance to the Duke whatsoever, instead resembling a miniature version of myself. Though a boy, he was strikingly handsome. I gazed at this child, lost in thought, wondering if the child from my previous life had looked similar. Although he resembled me, his temperament was remarkably akin to that of the Duke. From a young age, he displayed a penchant for wielding swords and practicing martial arts. By the time he turned 3, the Duke had begun to personally instruct him. My heart ached, yet the child never complained of fatigue or hardship, which greatly pleased the Duke. When Rong Xian turned 5, the young lady succumbed to her long-standing illness, leaving behind a 6-year-old daughter, Rong Yu. I found the child pitiable and took her into my care, raising her alongside Rong Xian. Rong Yu was also a victim of misfortune. Her mother had suffered poor health since giving birth to her, and with the son-in-law's heart already estranged, she lived a life of sorrow. Gradually, she directed all her frustrations at Rong Yu, resenting the fact that she had given birth to a daughter instead of a son, and loathing the toll the child had taken on her own health. Had she not been pregnant, her husband would not have shunned her. She would not have endured the pain of seeking a concubine for him. Without a concubine, none of this would have transpired. It seemed she had become obsessed, attributing all her suffering to this child. Rong Yu endured her mother's beatings, insults, and the bullying of servants, while her father remained indifferent, and even the concubines disregarded her. When she arrived, she was a frail little thing, shorter even than 5-year-old Rong Xian, her timid gaze avoiding confrontation, afraid to speak loudly or eat her fill. After several months, she finally managed to shyly call me grandmother with a smile. After more than 5 years of confinement, the son-in-law finally expressed remorse. He sobbed uncontrollably before the guards, pleading for a meeting with the Duke. I still remembered how he had once plotted to kill the Duke in my previous life. His remorse was far from genuine. Yet the Duke, not having lost hope in his adopted son, agreed to meet him. I pondered, what was my position in the Duke's heart after all these years? Perhaps another measure was needed. The son-in-law had visibly lost weight, his pallor stark as he knelt before the Duke, clinging to his leg and crying for forgiveness. The Duke sighed, ultimately softening his heart. He lifted the son-in-law's restrictions and arranged a banquet, sharing food and drink with him. After a few rounds of wine, the Duke was slightly inebriated when suddenly an assassin burst in, sword drawn, aiming directly at the Duke's face. In a panic, I lunged forward, the blade plunging into my abdomen. I crumpled softly into the Duke's embrace, feeling his arms tremble slightly, and a flicker of panic crossed his gaze. I bitterly found humor in the situation, thinking, now he might finally feel some affection for me. My head grew heavy, strength waning. If I were to succumb, it would be my fate. I could only hope that, in light of my sacrifice for him, he would take good care of Xian. I was fortunate. After 3 days of slumber, I awoke. When I opened my eyes, the first sight was the Duke, unkempt and unshaven, sitting by my bedside. Having gone 3 days without washing, he resembled a wild man from the mountains, a fearsome presence. Upon seeing me awake, he grasped my hand tightly and whispered, "Chun Tao, in this life, I shall never betray your loyalty." The matter of loyalty depended on my pretense. Yet his words made all my years of subservience worthwhile. The assassin had been traced back to the son-in-law who had sought to take the Duke's life. Knowing that with Xian only 5 years old, the vast Duke's residence would fall under his control upon the Duke's demise. In that case, Xian and I would be left vulnerable to his whims. Despite their bond, the Duke never took matters into his own hands. The son-in-law was apprehended by the authorities for plotting the Duke's murder, a crime punishable by death. After this incident, the Duke's treatment of me improved significantly, perhaps truly placing me in his heart. We lived like an ordinary couple, sharing meals, shelter, and the upbringing of our children. Yet he still did not elevate my status. I spent my life as a concubine. In the year when Rong Xian turned 16, the Duke was 48. He fought valiantly and, at last, repelled the enemy forces, albeit suffering grave injuries himself. The military physician declared that his wounds had affected his vital organs and that recovery was unlikely. Nevertheless, he mustered his remaining strength and returned to the capital from the frontier. When I beheld him, the old man lay upon his bed, his complexion ashen, with only a faint breath remaining. "Chun Nyang," he murmured weakly. I responded and knelt beside his bed, grasping his hand tightly. His eyes had become clouded, and he said, "Chun Nyang, I have already petitioned the emperor to reclaim the title of Duke of the State." A wave of heat surged in my eyes, and I choked out a reply, "I understand." He sighed deeply. In this lifetime, I could not bear a legitimate son. You have cherished me for so many years. Yet I have failed you. In the end, I can only designate you as a concubine. Even after masquerading as a devoted lover for half a lifetime, having borne him a son and becoming the Duke's sole concubine was not in vain. I shook my head, tears brimming in my eyes, and said, "To serve as the Duke's concubine is my fortune." In a side note, at the age of 32, I became a striking widow, finally liberated from the need to tread carefully and placate others. The Emperor, recognizing the Duke's contributions, although he had reclaimed the title of Duke of the State, still honored me with the title of matriarch. He also arranged a marriage for Rongxian with a princess who was not favored at court. The prince, destined never to serve in the imperial court, would likely find his father's teachings of little use. However, the little princess possessed both beauty and a gentle temperament, and Rongxian was exceedingly pleased. Lacking his father's grand ambitions, he was quite content with this union. After their marriage, they spent their days together, declaring their intent to become wandering heroes. Naturally, even heroes must eat and drink, and they occasionally wrote to me requesting funds. Rongyu had already married and borne children, often bringing her child to visit me, seeing me alone in the residence, which was rather dull. At 32, I had become a great-grandmother, feeling quite aged at such a young age. The latter part of my life was indeed comfortable. Before I knew it, I had lived to 80. Recently, I caught a chill and found myself perpetually drowsy, often sleeping for 2 or 3 days at a stretch. Each time I closed my eyes, I frequently dreamt of the Duke, who would scowl and puff his cheeks at me, claiming he had waited for me for over 40 years. He would scold me, calling me a deceiver for professing my love, yet failing to seek him out all these years. I found myself at a loss for words, feeling guilty. I had indeed deceived him. After a prolonged slumber, I awoke to find a room full of people, all with red-rimmed eyes gazing at me. Rongyu had become a middle-aged woman, holding her son beside her. Rongxian and the little princess had long ceased their adventurous escapades. Their son was already 25 years old, resembling his grandfather with a robust physique. He had inherited his father's skills, perhaps even surpassing him, with a hint of his grandfather's past prowess. Abandoned by his parents at birth, he had been raised by me. At this moment, the sturdy young man grasped my hand, tears swelling in his eyes. I smiled and said, "You bear a striking resemblance to your grandfather, yet your temperament is quite different. He never cried like this." With reddened eyes, he clutched my hand and rambled on about his desire to be a great hero like his grandfather. In light of the ongoing turmoil at the frontier and the Emperor's lack of capable leaders, he felt that his skills should not be squandered and was preparing to go to war. I nodded and cautioned, "Be wary. Do not overshadow your sovereign. Once the battle is won, accompany your parents on their wanderings. Do not refuse all rewards, accept some, for your future adventures will require funds." He nodded vigorously. Feeling drowsy again, I hazily closed my eyes. This time, perhaps I would truly seek out that old man. The end of the tale. Thank you for listening, and we shall meet again for the next story.